The Individual Investor Show.
You want it all, don't you? They share one thing, they all need money. Now let's see if they're brave enough to earn it.
Hello and welcome to the Individual Investor Show. My name is Jenna Brashear, your host for this evening. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you all had a wonderful week. According to a recent study conducted by Transamerica Center, 77% of people living and working in the United States are currently saving for retirement through an employer-sponsored retirement program. However, that means over 33% of workers are left without a solidified retirement savings plan. Additionally, another survey published by AAII stated that close to 49% of baby boomers plan to depend on Social Security as their primary source of their retirement income, while only 20% of millennials will plan to rely on this for their retirement. Saving for retirement may seem like a no-brainer, but a lot of people still are unsure where to start or how to calculate the amount of savings they will need to outlast them. This is where retirement calculators play a crucial role. Tonight's event is the Individual Investor Show Comparing Retirement Calculators. For this episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Charles Rotblut, as well as two members of our research team, Dease and Sean Murphy. We were able to discuss one of the latest articles in the May 2022 issue of the AAII Journal, Important Differences Exist Among Retirement Calculators, which compared 10 different programs that aim to help investors plan for a successful retirement. We highlight the importance of choosing a retirement calculator that fits your individual needs, the pros and cons of creating your own, what to look for, as well as what you will need to accurately plan. But before we jump in, I do want to preface tonight's presentation by reminding our viewers that AAII is a nonprofit educational group and is not a financial advisor, and thus is not able to give personal advice. Every investor is different. That's why our goal with each broadcast and article is to educate you on how to make better financial decisions. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy our presentation. Hi, Charles. Thanks so much for meeting with me today to discuss one of your latest articles featured in the May 2022 issue of the AAII Journal, Important Differences Exist Among the Retirement Calculators.
Hi, Jenna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so I'd just like to start off by discussing actually the ending paragraph to your article about retirement calculators. So rather than suggesting a specific calculator, you suggested individual investors look at more than one. So why is that?
Well, it's interesting. When we looked at the retirement calculators, I went into the article and I expected that every calculator would give us the same result and we'd be able to do an apples to apples comparison. And it really turned out often we were looking at apples to pears to tangerines in some cases. So there's a wide variance in terms of what they were giving you in terms of results. But there's also differences in assumptions, what types of questions they were asking. In the article, we have a really helpful table where we show them some of the things they were considering. For instance, whether or not you have a spouse. And that makes a huge difference because if it's just you, the amount of money you might need to retire on is less. But then again, your spouse you don't have a spouse who's also bringing in Social Security benefits. Perhaps they have savings as well. So yes, your expenses are less, but your income might be less as well. But we also saw what they're actually giving us in terms of results. Are they giving us how much do you have saved? How much do you have expecting an income? And so even when they had pretty close to the same assumptions and gave you pretty close to the same results, there's always differences in how they're actually making those determinations. And it was even interesting when we started going through this, a lot of the retirement calculators said you could specify, okay, I'm going to retire at age 67, I'm going to retire at age 64, so on. Kiplinger's actually gave us 5-year ranges. So if we're trying to use a certain retirement age, say 67, we couldn't quite do that for Kiplinger because it was 65 or 70. So you run into these little things where you think you're going to be doing apples to apples. And even when it is apples to apples, you might have a Fuji apple and you're trying to compare it to a Golden Delicious apple. Yes, technically they're apples, but if I blindfolded you and gave you both, you would know these are different apples. So you have all that going on. But the other thing is I actually want to share my screen because even when you get the results, So I'm going to show you, here's what some things I'm seeing here. So here's a result here that everyone can see from TD Ameritrade. I just want to show people some of the results when we can talk about the comparisons. In this case, they're giving you actually a breakdown here. They're giving you a beginning portfolio value. They're breaking down your post-retirement income and your investment earnings. Now, in this case, I presume post-retirement income is Social Security. But then when you look at some of the other ones, for instance, here's bank rate, they actually tell you Social Security. They tell you how much you're withdrawing from your retirement account. And so then again, another assumption is how much are you taking out of your retirement account? What strategy are you going to use? Are you going to use when you retire? The most popular among a lot of our members is simply to base them on RMDs. For those who are not familiar with it, that's required minimum distribution. It's a minimal amount the IRS requires you to pull out of your retirement accounts each year. But if you have a Roth IRA, you're not required to withdraw money out of it. So that plays a role. An alternative way is to take a certain percentage out of your retirement account, such as the Benyon 4% rule, which is take 4% out of your portfolio at the beginning of the year. But depending on how the retirement calculator determines what your withdrawals are going to be and what withdrawal strategy you're going to use, you can end up with a different number, a different estimated amount of money you'll need, which affects your results. So again, you could actually end up with a number that says, oh, you're set for retirement. And all of a sudden you think to yourself, well, I want to withdraw a higher amount because early on, I want to travel. I want to, have that second beach home. I'm going to take out more early on in retirement and I'll figure out the rest later on. So you do have those differences. But I also want to show people here that when you get to T. Rowe Price, it's not even giving you an income number. It's telling you what's your probability of outliving your money, being success, or not outliving your money, the chances of you outliving your money, which is a failure, are the chances of your money outliving you, which would be success. And again, you're getting here this chart, which tells you that successful, yeah, you're on track to reach your goals. If it's a failure, you're not on track to reach your goals. But it doesn't tell you what most people want to know is, well, how much money do I need to have saved? So when you start looking at these calculators and you start getting into the details, you start realizing that there are these differences. And even when things look similar, you still want to look at a slightly different calculator or a few different calculators to kind of get more of a broader estimate of whether or not you're on track, because that number that one calculator is going to give you may not accurately represent your actual situation in retirement. So a long-winded answer, but as you can see, a lot of things going on underneath the surface that we actually didn't expect when we started writing this article.
I think a lot of, you brought up some really good points. I think a lot of people might just, flock to the first retirement calculator or, they see, or that, one that somebody recommended, but it's really, you really have to get one that's custom to your own preferences and situation. And I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like I said, when we went into this, my original thought was we'd get X number and we'd be able to compare it to Y number and compare it to Z number, and let's see what the difference in numbers is. And once we started digging into the calculators, we started realizing that there was a lot of differences between these calculators and they weren't similar. And that to me was actually quite a surprise. I wasn't expecting that.
It was a surprise. And, you also suggested using a spreadsheet instead of a calculator. So could you explain your logic about this?
Sure. And this is really a case where somebody understands exactly what their situation is, has a general idea of how much they're going to save, how their portfolio allocation might evolve over time, and also how their salary might change. And certainly if they have a spouse who might retire at a different time, you can really put all this in a spreadsheet, because at the end of the day, it really is a matter of future value calculations in terms of how much you'll have in retirement, or present value, how much I need to save now. Now that does require comfort with using spreadsheets like Microsoft Excel. It does require some understanding of how to use functions such as future value, such as present value. And some people are very comfortable doing so. And if they are, I would suggest that if you're willing to put in a little effort, maybe consider building out your own spreadsheet, because I think you'll get a number that probably is more accurately reflects your own situation. Now, there always will be assumptions in terms of how much you'll save, how much you'll spend, what the market will do between now and retirement. So it will never be an exact number, but you'll have a lot more control. And in some cases, you'll actually be able to put, well, the spreadsheet, you'll be able to put in your own estimated Social Security benefits, which you can get from the Social Security Administration, where some calculators estimate Social Security for you. And again, if you have a spouse and you're trying to perhaps use some type of strategy where one spouse claims that on 1 year, another spouse delays, that plays in a role too. And that would make a spreadsheet more valuable. But again, you have to have that comfort level and that knowledge to use a spreadsheet. And that certainly does not apply to every individual.
That makes sense. And, for people who prefer a web-based tool, already created versus building out their own spreadsheet, what aspects should they look for in a retirement calculator?
Well, I think they really need to stop and consider their personal situation. And I brought up spouse several times. And the reason I'm doing that is not to say people should be married or single, but some calculators do ask, are you married? And if you are married, how much does your spouse have in terms of savings? How much do they have in terms of salary, perhaps Social Security? So if there is a second person involved, you want to use one of those calculators. If it's just you, then you might be able to get away with a calculator that doesn't consider that. But that's one of the things you should think about. You should also think about, what are you looking for in terms of output? Are you looking for something like T. Rowe Price, which I just showed you, that says, here's your probability of having enough money to carry you to the day you die, versus one that gives you actual numbers that you can dig in and can play with the assumptions. So how much detail do you want? And also, how much detail do you want in a calculator? Some calculators allow you to get into more detailed than others in terms of assumptions. So how much of that do you want? And we talk about those differences in the article, but you need to think about those. And again, you would think it would be pretty simple, like, oh, just tell me what's the most popular calculator and I'll go use it. But we found out it really gets complex pretty quickly. And you really do need to stop and think about what you actually want and what your situation is. And I really wish I could tell people use X, Y, or Z calculator, but it just is not the case.
And so we talked about, a lot, the different aspects that we should be looking for in retirement calculators. So is there anything that people should be aware of to avoid in any calculators?
Yeah, I think you really need to be cautious about the output. I think you also need to be aware of the limitations of each calculator and what they're asking you. For instance, going back to Kiplinger's, not to knock their calculator, but when you have those increments of retirement ages, realize that may not apply for you. But you also have to consider, they do consider somewhat static allocations. So for instance, if you're one of the many investors who's using a target date fund, these are very common as the default option in 401k plans. Their allocation changes over time, it gets more conservative. So the return they're going to give you is going to change over time. Now, if you're close to retirement, that really doesn't make a difference. But say you're age 25 or you're age 30, well, that target date fund you might be using is going to evolve quite a bit over time. So you have to realize these retirement calculators are making a lot of assumptions. They're trying to simplify things. So they're not overly complex. So they're not asking somebody 20 questions. Well, in doing so, they're making big generalizations. So you have to realize that's a scenario. Also, the calculator is only going to consider what you tell it. And I bring this up because I was recently going through my 403B because AAII is a nonprofit. We have a 403B instead of a 401k. But on it, it said, you have this much, and based on our estimates of what you have for retirement, you're not saving enough. But that one statement from our 403B plan didn't consider the fact that I had other IRAs, that my wife has an IRA. So it didn't calculate, figure in all those savings. And so just like that brokerage statement or the 401k statement you get might tell you, oh, you're not saving enough. Keep in mind, it's just looking at perhaps what you have in that one account. And if you have IRAs or perhaps you have a 401k in an old job, that changes the scenario. So you do want to consider that, but it also means if you are using a retirement calculator, make sure you have all your savings accounts and make sure you put in a total sum of what you have saved. And if those accounts are allocated differently, then you might have to calculate a blended return rate on your own. So again, additional complexities. And I realize that some people are trying to throw their hands up in the air and going, this is too complicated. I understand and I get it, but I'm also want to point out that there are a lot of moving parts, and it's not so easy to just have the single number, because there is quite a lot that goes into the pot to determine whether or not that single number is actually accurate. Or in the case where I looked at my 403B statement, well, it's not really accurate because it's not considering the broader picture.
So if you leave out information, basically, that's going to change those responses and then kind of skew what results you end up getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you might leave out information. The retirement calculator is going to tell you you're going to be eating cat food, when reality is you could be looking at Kobe burgers when you're in retirement. So quite a difference.
And that's something we all want, we all want to aspire to.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, you mentioned Social Security benefits in the very beginning, and I wanted to ask, how can members use retirement calculators to find out this information for them?
That was really interesting, and it's a good point to bring up, because some of the calculators automatically assume your Social Security benefits based on when you retire. Others asked you to input the Social Security, and so we have actually a chart on there showing you which calculators assume Social Security benefits for you and which ask you to input it. One of the things I would encourage people to do is to set up an account with the Social Security Administration. It's ssa.gov, Social Security Administration.gov, just the initials. And they will give you your estimated Social Security based on your earnings record. So it's your most accurate estimate of what your benefits are going to be. And I would use those numbers because they look at your full earnings record. And again, they're using assumptions, and they give you, what if you're retired at age 62? What if you're retired your full retirement age? For you and I, that's 67. And what if you retire at age 70? So that's going to be your most accurate number. And that's the number I would use, because Social Security for a lot of people is going to be a very large part of the retirement income. And obviously the proportion depends on how much they have saved between now and the time of retirement, but it's still going to be a nice sum for a lot of people. But at this point, I should also point out that not every retirement calculator we looked at considers whether or not you have a pension either. And so I know people in our generation are, what's a pension? But if you're fortunate to have a pension, you do want to take that into consideration as well, because that does play a role in how much you'll have to actually spend once you're in retirement.
That's another good reason to, do the spreadsheet versus, a pre-built one like you mentioned before, because you could input all that information in case the retirement calculators don't have that.
Exactly.
And so I did want to ask you some personal questions, just based on planning for retirement. So when did you first start planning or saving for retirement, and what was your personal experience?
So I started saving for retirement actually pretty early in my career. And I was in a 401k at the company I was working at. And so that's how I started at it. Just a little bit of background. So I actually started in the field of advertising. So I remember looking at these fun expenses and going to my boss like, well, what are these expenses funds are doing? And I later switched to, got into finance, got my CFA. So my knowledge has gone up a lot. But one of the things I've done over time, I've found personally helpful, is I've actually built a spreadsheet, a very simple spreadsheet about how much am I saving every paycheck. And it's probably more detailed than a lot of people have or need. But I find it really helpful just to start each year to break out how much are you going to save for each paycheck. And I really have a goal in mind that I want to save X dollars. And every year I try to increase what X is. But I personally find it helpful to actually, okay, here's all my pay periods throughout the year. here's how much I want to pull out of each paycheck. So a bit of a retirement savings budget, for instance. But I find that personally helpful. And while I think retirement calculators are good for telling you whether or not you're on track or if you're off track, I think a lot of emphasis also needs to be on the savings and how do you actually set up a savings plan. I am personally a big proponent of direct deposits. As soon as your paycheck hits your bank account, have money being pulled out of it. Now, if you're on a 401k plan, or 457 or 403b, you can get the money pulled right out of your paycheck before it even hits your bank account. And my personal theory is, if it's not in your checking account, you're probably not going to spend it. But if you're in a situation where perhaps maybe you have an IRA, or perhaps your spouse or your partner has an IRA and you'll have a joint checking account, fund those, have those contributions go to that account the same day you get paid, so it just gets pulled out of there. And I find having those set up works really well because we humans tend to really suffer from inertia, which means we're really bad about getting off the couch and advertising and exercising. But because we're really bad about doing stuff, is that once we set these automatic withdrawals out, we tend not to make the effort to change them. So if you just make that one little effort, you're probably not going to tweak it, which means you're going to get inertia working in your favor, and that automatically will make you a better saver.
I like those suggestions. I think that's really important because, from every generation, I think, most people aren't ready for retirement, and
No.
it's just a small habit thing can really make a big difference. I agree with that. I like that. And I just want to ask you, if you could give an investor, because, we talked about different personas in the article, we talked about early career, near retirement. And so if you could give an investor that was just beginning, and then also one that was nearing retirement, a piece of advice about retirement planning or retirement calculators as a whole, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say for someone just starting out, I would say two things. A, save whatever you can. And I understand if you're starting out, you're probably struggling to make rent. You probably, in these days, probably have a lot of financial debt. Save whatever you can. And even if it doesn't seem like much, maybe it's $25 out of your paycheck. And I realize you're thinking, well, that's not going to help me towards retirement. Just start with something. Don't worry about how big square one is. Just get to square one and then try to just increase it every year, particularly if you get a raise. And just start getting that habit of contributing, because it really is a snowball if you let it go. But if you just let it go and let it build over time. But the second part of that is advice that Jack Bogle shared with me. Jack Bogle, the former founder of Vanguard, he told me, when you start saving when you're young, just never look at your brokerage statements. Just allocate aggressively. Never look at your brokerage statements to the day you retire. And his advice was, on a day you retire, have a doctor standing nearby, because you might pass out once you see how large that balance is. So, and I might say to people who are young in their 20s, you're going to tune in the market. You're going to hear about things going haywire. You've got 40 years. And 40 years, anything that bad happens over the short term tends to get washed out, and you tend to grow wealth over the long term. So just keep socking away and don't look. But for someone who's nearing retirement, and I actually talked about this earlier in the AAII Journal, think about all the decisions you need to make. And I think when you're looking at retirement calculators specifically, they're going to assume a certain allocation. But as you near retirement, start thinking about building up to 3 or 4 years of cash savings. How much you think you're going to spend each year, have that in cash. And the reason why is, the year before you retire or the year after you retire, if a bad bear market strikes, two things are going to happen. One, your portfolio is going to be at peak value. And so it's going to drop from that peak value. And as it's falling from that peak value, if you do not have this cash bucket, you're going to sell stocks when they're down. So you have this ill-timed drop, and then you're going to try and pull away from it. If you have this cash bucket, and yes, interest rates right now stink, but you can withdraw from that cash bucket, and so you won't be selling stocks when they're down. And for a lot of new retirees, the big risk is really getting a bear market within the first 4 years, or even the first 10 years of retirement. And if you can get past that point, really without having a bear market, without having to sell stocks when the market's significantly down, not just 5 or 10%, but we're talking a steep correction, maybe 15, 20% or more, having that cash bucket can really save your portfolio and can set you way up down the road. But realize you're not going to really easily factor this into a retirement calculator. So it's something you need to think about doing before you retire, just so you have that protection. It is insurance. It will cost you some return, but I think down the road, you'll be glad you have it, both psychologically and financially.
Yeah, that makes sense. And those are really good pieces of advice. I think, a lot of people get worried, especially if, they're really approaching it and they're just in the wrong market. So, understanding how to weather that and get through it and be able to, not, dip into your save or into your portfolio and start selling stocks. That's very good advice. And I just want to ask you, so is there anything else that you wanted to cover in the article that we didn't mention already?
No, I think it would be useful for people to go through the article and just see those comparisons and see how they compare, how the differences are before they start using calculators. So at least they're going in with a more informed view of what they might get out of calculators.
Excellent, excellent. And yeah, thank you so much, Charles. I really appreciate you delving into your article with us. I learned so much about it, and I definitely want to start delving into our list. I think we highlighted 10 of them. So if anybody wants to go on there and check them out, you can. I just want to remind members that they can go into the latest issue of the journal, which is the May issue, by visiting AAII.com/journal. And yeah, thanks so much, Charles.
Thank you, Jenna.
Hi, Sean. Thanks so much for joining me today to discuss your article that you worked on the May 2022 journal, Important Differences Exist Among Retirement Calculators. And I just wanted to jump right in. So I want to ask you, what do retirement calculators help investors with?
Yeah, so they help investors see how their current plan savings for retirement is going. So it usually provides some information on income at retirement and how you are in terms of that, if there's a shortfall or a surplus, and overall just how your current plan is working right now.
That's excellent. And so why is it important to compare different calculators to find the best one that actually suits your individual needs?
Yeah, so a lot of the different calculators have different inputs, and some go into more detail than others. For example, some factor in Social Security, whereas some don't. So really, the calculators ended up producing a wide range of results. And the biggest difference was the projected need for savings, or the amount needed at retirement.
Interesting. And so just kind of give a background, what were the different calculators that you evaluated for this article, and how many did you guys look at?
Yeah, so there were 10 total calculators that we looked at. There was AARP, Bankrate, Fidelity, Kiplinger, Merrill, NerdWallet, Schwab, T. Rowe Price, TD Ameritrade, and Vanguard.
Excellent. And you guys built a couple different personas to really analyze and compare the different retirement calculators. So can you just tell me a little bit about how you created those and why you did that?
Yeah, so we wanted to get a number of different scenarios to see, based on where someone was in their life, how these calculators would produce the results for them. So there are 3: an early career, a mid-career, and a nearing retirement persona, all with varying amounts of previous savings and saving different amounts of their total income in each scenario.
And as you were writing and evaluating each of these retirement calculators, did one of them actually come out on top, and why do you think that was?
I wouldn't say there was one specifically that stood out or came out on top. There were definitely some that went into a little bit more detail, like Kiplinger and Merrill. So those stood out more from that perspective if someone was looking to get a more detailed analysis on their retirement savings. But they all provided good options. So I wouldn't really say there was one particularly that stood out.
Good to know. And what, as you're talking about the different personas that you had, so what were the results in regards to each persona? So the early career, the mid-career, and the near retirement?
Yeah, so the early career we found with obviously having the longest investment time horizon, that all but 2 of the retirement calculators, being Fidelity and Schwab, projected a shortfall in savings. So most of them produced similar results in terms of having enough money at retirement. And then the mid-career persona was kind of more a mixed bag. About half of the calculators actually projected a shortfall in savings. And the end career, having the largest amount of previous savings, only had one calculator, which was Merrill, that didn't have enough savings at retirement.
Interesting. And, as a whole, I kind of, just wanted to ask, what did you learn about retirement calculators and planning as a whole while you were researching for this article?
Yeah, so I think the biggest surprise for me personally was how different some of the results were. I figured, being the same scenario for each calculator, that the results would be pretty similar, but that just wasn't the case, which was kind of surprising and made me realize, how important it is to really, take a look at a number of these different calculators and see the numbers that they produce to really get a more holistic view on how you're doing in terms of planning for retirement.
It makes sense. I mean, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't, even think about having to, they would just pick the first retirement calculator that they see instead of actually comparing and contrasting like you guys did. So that's good to know. And, I wanted to ask you our final question, have you started saving for retirement? And if not, do you know what a first step you will take when you do?
So I actually have started saving. I started about a year ago with my own account. So it's been going well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Sean. I really appreciate it. And I do just want to mention that members can read this article in the May 2022 issue of the AAII Journal by visiting AAII.com/journal. And yeah, thanks so much, Sean, and have a great rest of your day. Hi, Dylan. Thanks so much for joining me today to discuss your article that you worked on for the May 2022 Journal issue, Important Differences Exist Among Retirement Calculators. And I just wanted to jump right in. So why do you think using a retirement calculator is helpful?
Well, I think it's a good way to plan how much money you're going to need in retirement, and I think it's important that even people who aren't necessarily super close to retirement use one to understand how much they're going to need to sustain their living or lifestyle.
That's excellent. And why is it important to compare calculators to find the best one that's right for you?
After looking at a bunch of different calculators, it's pretty clear that all of them are different. Some ask a little bit more in-depth questions, maybe more about what sort of income your spouse makes, or, just kind of other things like that. And some are a little bit more personal. So you have to really know going into it, how much information are they going to want to give me, or am I going to have to give? And then how much do I have?
It makes sense. Yeah, and it was interesting to see how many differences there were, just going through the article as far as like Social Security benefits, and then you like you said, the income for your spouse. So that was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And which calculators delved into more details and offered more information for investors?
I think it's really more about a lot of the calculators I looked at. There wasn't necessarily too much uniformity. Some offered different features than others. I know Charles Schwab was pretty extensive. They had a bunch of smaller details about how much your spouse makes, what's their income, and things like that. So it really, I think, is more about exploring what's out there and kind of seeing what best matches your specific situation.
That's good to know. And, I just wanted to, we built out a couple different personas, that you created to analyze these various calculators. So I just want to ask you if you could delve into a little bit, for example, which one did you work on and what did you find when you were looking into these personas?
Yep. So I worked on the one nearing retirement. And so this person was the oldest out of the three profiles, and the closest obviously to retirement. I think they also had a spouse, and they were a single income household. The other ones we did were someone in their 20s, I believe, and they, single, and then someone around their 40s as well.
And so, while researching for this article, what did you learn about retirement calculators or planning as a whole?
I think what I really took away from it was that planning for retirement is really going to come down to your situation and some of the variables that you have, which is why it's really important, I think, to explore a wide variety of retirement calculators, because there really isn't one that works for everyone. They seem very specialized.
And if you could, point out one thing that surprised you or you thought was important for investors to know about from reading this article, what would you highlight?
I think one thing that kind of surprised me going into it was just sort of the amount of the extensiveness of some of the information that you typically might not think you need. So I guess one thing I'd recommend or highlight is just when you look at these retirement calculators. Obviously, if you have a spouse, I think it's important to do it with them, and then also just have your information ready, and you'll be in a much easier position to get the most out of these.
Makes sense. And, I just want to ask you a personal question just to kind of end up our interview, but, have you started saving for retirement? And if not, do you know what a first step you will take when you do start saving for retirement?
So yeah, I put away some money every month in one of my accounts just for retirement. Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today,
Thank
Dylan.
you.
Yeah, thanks. And I just wanted to remind members that they can read this article in the May 2022 issue of the AAII Journal by visiting AAII.com/journal. But yeah, thanks so much, and have a great rest of your evening.
All right. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. I want to thank Charles Rotblut, Dylan Dease, and Sean Murphy for delving into the article more with us. I think a good takeaway from the article is that you shouldn't just pick the first retirement calculator that you see online or hear about, and instead find one that actually fits your individual needs, preferences, goals, and anything else you need. And if you're someone who is looking for more information on retirement planning, savings, or how to take withdrawals, we have an online community that is available to all AAII members, where hundreds of people are currently discussing topics about taking withdrawals, planning for their retirement portfolios, and so much more. So you can visit community.aaii.com to learn more and join the retirement withdrawals community. And as always, please remember to click the subscribe button if you'd like to be alerted of future II shows. You can always catch a replay of tonight's event on our YouTube channel, and make sure to register for upcoming webinars or events by visiting aaii.com/webinars. If you're an investor on the go and want to catch the II show while driving or going for your daily walk, you can now follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and so many more. Also, members can view this article, as well as so much more, in the May 2022 issue of the AAII Journal by visiting aaii.com/journal. And with that, we wish all of you viewing good health, good fortune, and a great evening. Thank you and happy investing.